My people, imagine this for a second. 16 African nations, all working hard to grow their economies, all doing what every other nation in the world does, borrowing money to build roads, power plants, ports, and schools. But here's a twist. Before a single dollar lands in their hands, 3 giant credit rating agencies based in New York and London decide just how risky they are. That's right. These ratings aren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. They are the difference between borrowing at 5% or at 15% interest rate. And these ratings, which experts say are often subjective, outdated, and downright biased, have cost African countries a staggering $75 billion, according to reports. $75 billion, my people. Now, let me put that in perspective, okay? $75 billion could build 70,000 modern schools across the continent, dozens of world-class hospitals, or connect every rural community in Africa to electricity twice over. But instead, that money flowed out straight into the pockets of lenders and bondholders because Africa is carrying something economists call the Africa Premium, an invisible tax slapped on simply for being African. And here's the real deal. When these ratings are wrong, when they're too low, there's no accountability, no refunds, just higher costs, fewer opportunities, and dreams deferred for millions. So today we're breaking down why Africa desperately needs to build its own credit rating system and why the stakes are bigger than just numbers on a spreadsheet. Because make no mistake, until Africa builds a system that understands and speaks for Africa, we will keep paying for a narrative we did not write and cannot afford, quite frankly. We're going to break it down, but first, a big welcome to all of our subscribers and members. I'm so glad you're here with us. And if you're watching and haven't joined us yet, please consider this your personal invitation. Because here at PanaGenius TV, we're not just building a channel, we're creating a home for global Black stories that are told with truth, with intention, and with power. And if that speaks to you, and I hope it does, then hit subscribe, tap the bell, drop a super thanks, or join our membership community. Your support helps us do what we do even better, and we appreciate it. All right, now let's get into it. Here's the thing about credit ratings. They're supposed to be neutral, numbers and analysis, cold, hard facts. But for Africa, it's anything but neutral. The 3 big agencies, Moody's, S&P, and Fitch, control over 95% of the global credit rating market. They decide, often with very little transparency, whether a country is safe to lend to or risky. And for African nations, that risk label is almost always harsher than reality. This is what economists call the Africa Premium, a financial penalty built into the system simply for being African. Here's how it works. When a rating is low, lenders demand higher interest rates to compensate for risk. That means an African country could be paying 10% or more to borrow, while a country with similar economic fundamentals in Europe or Asia might pay just 2%. And those inflated costs aren't pocket change, no. According to a UNDP analysis, African nations have lost close to $75 billion in recent years. $25 billion in extra interest payments, and another $50 billion in loans that never happened because of unnecessarily low ratings. Think about that. $75 billion drained out of African economies, not because of corruption or mismanagement, but because of perception. And it's not just unfair, it's self-fulfilling. A downgrade makes borrowing more expensive, which eats up your budget, which makes your debt look worse, which leads to, guess what? Another downgrade. This isn't finance. This is a treadmill built for Africa to run on and never get ahead. Now, Numbers are powerful, but let's make this real, okay? Take Ghana. In 2022, Ghana's economy was already under strain from the pandemic and rising global food and fuel prices. But when the big three agencies downgraded its credit rating, borrowing costs spiked overnight. Investors pulled back. The government was then forced into emergency talks with the IMF, and the cost of serving its debt swallowed funds that could have gone to teachers, nurses, and infrastructure. Or Zambia, downgraded multiple times before its actual default in 2020. Each downgrade made it more expensive to borrow, forcing the government to cut spending on social programs just to keep up with interest payments. By the time default hit, the ratings had already done their damage. Schools underfunded, hospitals short on supplies, infrastructure projects completely stalled. And then there's Kenya, where a negative outlook in 2023 meant that issuing Eurobonds would have cost nearly double in interest compared to a similar country in Asia. The result? Projects delayed or shelved entirely. These aren't abstract consequences. This is fewer hospital beds during a health crisis. This is rural communities waiting years longer for electricity. This is young people watching job opportunities vanish because investors were scared away by a letter grade that didn't reflect the real story. When biased ratings choke off access to affordable capital, the damage isn't just balance sheets. It's to human lives and national futures. So here's the question. If the current system is stacked against us, what's the alternative, you may be asking? Well, enter the African Credit Rating Agency, or AFCRA. This is the African Union's answer to decades of biased assessments. Announced earlier this year with plans to launch in September, AFCRA will be a homegrown institution designed to evaluate African countries through a lens that understands African realities. So what does that mean in practice? It means factoring in development potential, not just short-term fiscal pressures. It means valuing resilience, like how African economies bounce back quickly from shocks that would cripple others. It means using data that's gathered on the ground by people who actually understand the political and economic context, rather than relying on outdated spreadsheets and stereotypes. AFCRA's goal is simple but ambitious. Well, I keep saying AFCRA, but I don't know if they're calling it that yet or if it's the African Credit Rating Agency. But their goal is simple: to provide independent, credible, and context-aware ratings that tell the full story, the story global markets have been ignoring. And this isn't just about pride or politics, right? It's about billions of dollars in savings on interest payments. It's about opening the door to fairer borrowing terms, more investment, and the ability to finance Africa's own growth without begging for relief after the fact. And if done right, AFCRA could be a game changer, giving African nations the financial breathing room they've been denied for decades. Now let's be honest, building AFCRA won't be as simple as flipping a switch. The first challenge, credibility. Global investors are used to the Moody's, S&P's, and Fitch stamp of approval. Convincing them to now trust a brand new African agency at that will take time and a proven track record of accurate, transparent, and independent assessments. But then there's also the governance question. Who runs AFCRA? How do we make sure it's insulated from political pressure? Because if investors sense that ratings could be influenced by politics rather than data, they'll dismiss it before it even gets off the ground. Right now, the African Union says it will employ highly skilled professionals and adopt transparent methodologies that are in line with international best practices while reflecting African realities. They also plan to institute oversight mechanisms and partnerships with respected institutions to further bolster its credibility. And here's another hurdle: global integration. Even if AFCRA gives a country a strong rating, many lenders are legally bound to consider only the ratings from the big three Western agencies when deciding borrowing terms. That means African governments will need to push for international recognition and reform in how ratings are used. Critics also warn of the risk of going too soft, of AFCRA inflating ratings just to counter Western bias, right? And if that happens, it loses credibility fast and the whole project just collapses. So yes, this is a fight, not just to build a new institution, but to make it respected, trusted, and impossible to ignore. But AFCRA has made it clear that its objective is not to compete with or replace the three international credit rating agencies, but rather to complement them by providing an alternative perspective. It will focus on filling gaps in data and analysis, addressing regional nuances, and promoting African financial integration to allow for a diversified view of creditworthiness. So here's where we are, my people. Every year, billions of dollars are siphoned out of African economies, not because of corruption, not because of laziness, but because someone else controls the narrative of our financial worth. And those decisions, made in boardrooms thousands of miles away, determine whether a child in Malawi gets a new school, whether a hospital in Sierra Leone has medicine, whether a road in Cameroon ever gets built. This is about sovereignty, because if you can't control how the world values you, then you can't control the cost of your own future. An African credit rating system isn't a luxury, it's a necessity, especially now. There's a difference between being price takers in a global market and being price makers in our own destiny. And as we anticipate the launch of the African Credit Rating Agency this September, the question is no longer if Africa will act, but how boldly. Because make no mistake, my people, until Africa builds a system that understands Africa, we will keep paying for a story that we did not write. A story that cost us our money, our opportunities, and our freedom to grow. So the real question now is, will AFCRA be the game changer we need it to be? Or just another idea that sounded good on paper? And will we, the people, have the will to hold it accountable to the future we deserve? Something for us to think about and discuss. And I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. That's it for today's show. Thanks for watching. And as always, like, comment, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. I'm Sandra Babu-Boateng, and until next time, take care.